Hello everyone. I'm the storyteller from the channel Whispered Tales and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? At what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax. Arrival. I do not recall what first drew me to that forgotten part of the country. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps a quiet longing for solitude. I had been traveling for days, following crumbling roads that twisted like ancient veins through dense forests. My destination was not marked on any modern map. It was something I had found mentioned only once, buried deep in an old journal I found at a flea market, its pages brittle and brown, its words cryptic. The journal spoke of a village hidden far from the world, where the air remained still and the night stretched on far longer than they should. No date, no precise directions, only a name, Belgrave. On the morning of my arrival, the sky was a dull shade of pewter, with thick clouds hanging low enough to graze the treetops. Birds were strangely absent, their silence making the woods feel hollow. My footsteps crunched softly against the damp earth as I navigated the overgrown path. The forest seemed to swallow sound itself. Even the wind, when it stirred, whispered in cautious tones. As I walked, I noticed subtle signs of human passage, though faint and nearly lost to time: an old wagon wheel, half buried in moss, a rusted lantern hanging from a skeletal branch, and strange markings carved into the trunks of ancient oaks. The symbols were unfamiliar, looping and spidery, some resembling runes, others twisting in forms that defied easy interpretation. I followed these markers, unsure whether they were guiding me forward or warning me away. It was late afternoon when the trees finally gave way, and I stood upon the crest of a hill. Below me lay Belgrave. The village was small, tucked into a basin surrounded by dense woods. Its buildings were old and leaning, their weather-beaten roofs covered in dark moss. Smoke curled lazily from a few crooked chimneys, though no movement stirred in the streets. The entire village seemed paused in a moment outside of time, a faded photograph half forgotten in the corner of an attic. I descended the hill cautiously, the path narrowing as it curved between fields of tall, dead grass. The first structure I passed was a chapel, its steeple broken and sagging to one side, the bell long since fallen and shattered on the ground below. Faded stained glass peered out like tired eyes. Further on, I found the main street, or what remained of it. Wooden storefronts, their signs faded beyond recognition, stood like hollowed-out shells. A cobbler's shop with cracked leather boots still displayed in the window. A tailor's shop with faded curtains drawn tight against prying eyes. Everything was in place, yet lifeless. It was then I realized something unsettling. Despite the faint smoke rising from the chimneys, there were no people to be seen. No children playing in the streets, no merchants tending their wares, no farmers returning from their fields. The entire village was silent, save for the occasional creak of weathered wood shifting in the breeze. I called out, softly at first. "Hello?" My voice fell flat against the silence, swallowed by the mist. I tried again, louder this time. Still, no answer. And yet, I could not shake the feeling of being watched. I wandered further in, my steps echoing in the empty lanes. Eventually, I found an inn, the Black Oak, according to the faded lettering on its sign. The door hung ajar, swaying slightly as though inviting me in. Against my better judgment, I crossed the threshold. Inside, the air was thick and stale, heavy with the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic. Dust motes floated lazily in shafts of pale light filtering through cracked windows. The room was furnished but untouched, as though the patrons had all stepped out for a moment and forgotten to return. Tables were set, chairs pushed back, a single glass of wine resting on the bar, its surface clouded by time. Behind the bar, a register sat open, its drawer empty. I rang the small bell beside it, its sharp tone jarring against the quiet. Still, no response. I debated leaving then and there, but the weight of my journey compelled me to stay. There was a staircase toward the back of the inn, leading up to what I presumed were the guest rooms. With caution, I ascended, the old steps groaning beneath my weight. The hallway above was dim and narrow, lined with crooked doors. I selected one at random, room 4, and turned the handle. It opened without resistance. The room was simple but clean, surprisingly so. A bed with a hand-stitched quilt, a writing desk by the window, and a wash basin in the corner. Everything appeared to have been prepared for a guest, yet no one had come. I set down my bag and sat on the edge of the bed, listening. Nothing. It was only as night began to fall that the village changed. Darkness crept over Belgrave like a living thing, stretching its fingers through the streets and alleys. The mist thickened, swirling in the corners of my vision. I lit a small oil lamp I had found in the room and placed it by the window, hoping the light would offer some comfort. From somewhere distant, I heard the faintest whisper, barely audible, as though someone spoke just beyond the edge of hearing. I strained to catch the words, but they slipped away, lost in the rustling wind. Sleep did not come easily. I lay beneath the quilt, listening to the silence press against the walls. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sigh of the wind sounded like footsteps approaching, voices murmuring secrets I could not comprehend. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. I awoke in the dead of night. The lamp still burned weakly beside me, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. But something was wrong. The window, which I had latched before lying down, now stood wide open. The curtains billowed inward, stirred by an unnatural wind. And beneath the whisper of the breeze, I heard it again, closer this time. Voices. Faint, overlapping, speaking in a language I could not understand. They seemed to surround the building, filling the air like a distant chant. I crept to the window and peered outside. What I saw chilled me to my core. Figures stood in the street below. Dozens of them, perhaps more. Their faces obscured by shadow, their forms barely distinguishable from the mist. They stood motionless, heads tilted slightly upward, as though watching me. Their mouths moved in unison, though the words remained beyond comprehension. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding in my chest. The voices continued, weaving together in a low, rhythmic pulse. I felt trapped, ensnared in something far older and darker than I could grasp. After what felt like hours, though it could have been mere minutes, the figures began to fade. Slowly, as though dissolving into the mist itself, they vanished one by one until only the empty street remained. And then, silence. I closed the window and bolted it shut, retreating to the bed. Sleep eluded me for the remainder of the night, my thoughts racing through questions with no answers. When dawn broke, pale and cold, I ventured downstairs. The inn was just as I had left it, though I could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. Stepping outside, I found the village unchanged, the streets empty once more. Yet something felt different. The air was heavier, the shadows deeper. I decided then to explore further. I would find answers. I had to know what Belgrave truly was, and why it had called to me. With hesitant steps, I made my way toward the village square, where an ancient well stood at its center. The stones around it were etched with those same strange symbols I had seen in the forest. As I approached, I noticed something at the base of the well. A journal. Old, worn, and disturbingly familiar. It was the same journal that had led me here, the very one I had found in that flea market, miles and miles away. But how had it come to rest here, in this forgotten place? I picked it up with trembling hands, opening its brittle pages. The words were different now. They told my story. Every step I had taken, every thought I had harbored, every fear I had felt in the night, it was all written here, as though the village itself had been watching, recording. And at the bottom of the last page, scrawled in hurried script, were 3 chilling words: "You are next." The wind shifted, and once again I heard the whispers, rising softly from the shadows. The village was not empty. It never had been. I stood frozen by the well, the journal trembling in my hands. The morning sun offered little comfort, its rays thin and pale, as if struggling to reach this place. I glanced around, half expecting to see the shadowy figures from the night before still watching me from alleyways or behind the cracked window panes. But there was no one. Only that endless, suffocating quiet. I slipped the journal into my coat and turned from the well, my footsteps echoing on the worn cobblestones as I made my way deeper into Belgrave. I had to know what else was hiding in this place. The urge to flee gnawed at the edges of my mind, but some greater force compelled me forward. Past the square, the village sprawled out in narrow lanes and crooked alleys. Ivy choked the walls of abandoned homes, windows stared out like dark, sightless eyes, and rusted weather vanes creaked softly in the wind. Eventually, I found what appeared to be a small library, or perhaps it had once been a town hall. Its door hung slightly open, inviting or warning, I couldn't tell. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mold and paper. Shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten tomes, their spines faded and crumbling. I ran my fingers along the dusty shelves, searching for anything that could explain the village's strange existence. At last, tucked away in a corner, I found a bundle of fragile papers, tied with twine and sealed with a wax emblem resembling the strange symbols from the forest. I untied it carefully and began to read. The papers spoke of a ritual, performed centuries ago by the villagers of Belgrave. According to the account, the village had been plagued by a curse, an ancient force from deep within the forest, something they called the shadow beneath the roots. In their desperation, the villagers struck a bargain. In exchange for peace, they would offer their voices to the darkness. From that day forward, the villagers lived in silence by day. But when night fell, their stolen voices would return, not to them, but to the thing beneath the earth. And in the darkness, it spoke through them. I shuddered, realizing that the whispers I had heard were not mere echoes of madness. They were the voices of the villagers, trapped, repeating some ancient chant they could no longer control. A sudden noise pulled me from my thoughts. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, approaching from the hall. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. From the shadows emerged an old man, thin as a corpse, his face pale and weathered. His eyes were clouded, and his mouth opened and closed soundlessly, as if he were speaking words I could not hear. For a long moment, we stared at one another. Then he raised a trembling finger and pointed toward the door. Though his lips moved, no sound escaped them. Still, I understood. "Leave." I backed away, bowing my head in silent apology. He watched until I had crossed the threshold, then disappeared once more into the gloom. As I stepped back outside, the wind picked up, cold and sharp against my skin. The village had changed again, its streets darker, narrower, as though the buildings had shifted while I was away. I realized with a sinking dread that the path I had taken from the inn to the square no longer existed. Belgrave was alive. It rearranged itself when no one was looking. I wandered for what felt like hours, each turn leading me deeper into the labyrinth. My hunger gnawed at me, but I found no sign of food, no open markets, no livestock. Only the remnants of a place long abandoned by the living. Eventually, I stumbled upon a graveyard. Its gates, twisted and rusted, groaned in protest as I pushed them open. The headstones were worn smooth, the names erased by wind and time. At the far end of the cemetery stood a mausoleum, its stone doors ajar. Against my better judgment, I entered. The air inside was cold and damp, thick with the scent of earth and rot. A narrow staircase spiraled downward into darkness. I lit my oil lamp and descended, each step echoing like a heartbeat. The stairs led to a crypt lined with sarcophagi. But what caught my eye was the mural along the far wall. It depicted a great tree, its roots sprawling deep underground. Beneath the roots lurked a monstrous shape, featureless, vast, and watching. Around the tree, figures knelt in worship, their faces blank, their mouths open in eternal silence. At the base of the mural, an inscription in crumbling letters: "He who listens in the dark feeds upon our voices. Speak not his name, lest he awaken." As I read the words, the temperature dropped sharply. I felt the weight of countless eyes upon me, though I stood alone. I turned to leave, but as I did, I caught sight of something on the floor. A small, hand-carved idol shaped like the tree from the mural. Its surface was worn smooth from years of handling. Against my instincts, I picked it up and slipped it into my pocket. The moment I touched it, the whispers returned. Soft at first, then growing louder, circling around me like a cold wind. They filled my mind, speaking in a language I did not know, yet somehow understood. A warning, or perhaps a curse. I fled the crypt, bursting back into the pale daylight, gasping for breath. The village felt different now, closer, tighter. The streets seemed to lean inward, hemming me in. The shadows stretched longer than they should, and every window seemed to hold a watching eye. I knew I could not remain out in the open. Returning to the Black Oak Inn, I found my room just as I had left it. I locked the door behind me, bolted the windows, and sat on the bed, my thoughts a tangled knot of fear and confusion. I retrieved the journal from my coat and flipped to the last page, hoping for some clue. But the page had changed again. Now it read, "The ritual begins tonight." And beneath it, in smaller script, "Return to the well at midnight." I stared at the words, feeling the creeping dread settle into my bones. Nightfall came swiftly, the sky swallowing the village in darkness far earlier than it should. I watched from my window as the mist thickened, rolling through the streets like a living thing. Once again, the figures appeared, emerging from alleys and doorways, silent, watching. But this time, they moved. In eerie unison, they turned and began walking toward the village square. Toward the well. I knew then that the ritual the journal spoke of was no legend. It was real. And somehow, I was meant to be a part of it. I gathered my courage, took the lamp, and stepped out into the night. The streets were eerily quiet save for the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. The villagers, if they were still truly people, lined the path, their heads bowed, their faces hidden beneath hoods and scarves. They said nothing, yet their presence spoke volumes. When I reached the well, they had already formed a wide circle around it. In the center, the air shimmered with a faint light, as though the space itself had thinned. An elder figure stepped forward from the crowd, robed in tattered black. Beneath the hood, I glimpsed hollow eyes and cracked lips. He raised a bony hand, gesturing for me to approach the well. I hesitated. And then I felt it, a pull, like invisible threads wrapping around my body, urging me forward. My legs moved against my will, carrying me to the edge of the well. The elder produced an ancient book, its cover made of cracked leather and sealed with iron clasps. He opened it to a marked page and pointed to the text, then to me. I understood what he wanted. I was to speak the words aloud. But the warning from the crypt rang in my mind, "Speak not his name, lest he awaken." I looked at the passage. The words swam before my eyes, shifting and changing as though alive. My mouth felt dry, my heart thundered in my chest. If I read these words, what would I unleash? The villagers waited, motionless, the mist curling around their feet. I closed my eyes and spoke, but not the words from the book. Instead, I recited a simple prayer I remembered from my childhood. A plea for light, for mercy, for protection from the dark. At first, nothing happened. Then, the well groaned, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. The ground trembled beneath my feet. The villagers hissed in unison, their bodies convulsing as if struck by an unseen force. The elder dropped the book, and it burst into flame. The shimmering light above the well flickered, then collapsed inward, pulling the mist with it. A deafening roar echoed through the square, as though the earth itself screamed. And then, silence. The villagers crumpled to the ground, their forms flickering like dying embers before dissolving into mist. I stood alone in the square, the wind slowly dying to a hush. The journal in my pocket grew warm. I pulled it free and opened it. A single sentence greeted me, "You have delayed the darkness, but it is not gone." The pages turned on their own, revealing a map of the village. Certain locations were marked, places I had yet to explore. Beneath the map, in faint letters, "Find the root. Cut it before it grows again." Exhausted and cold, I stumbled back to the inn. I knew now that my presence here was no accident. Velgrave had called me, and I had answered. But the fight was far from over. I lay awake as dawn broke, thin and colorless, wondering what the next night would bring. Because the whispers had only begun. Root's sleep did not come at all that night. Even when the first light of dawn spread over Velgrave, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse and twist as though unwilling to leave. I stared at the map in the journal for what felt like hours, studying the markings, each labeled with a single word: Bell Tower. Warden's House. The Hollow Tree. The Mill. 4 places. 4 keys, perhaps. Or 4 warnings. I had no way of knowing. I packed my belongings, including the idol from the crypt and the cursed journal, and stepped back out into the streets of Belgrave. The mist was thinner in the morning, but it clung stubbornly to the ground like a living thing reluctant to leave. I decided to start with the bell tower. It rose above the village like a broken finger pointing to the sky, its top leaning precariously to one side. As I approached, the air grew colder, the silence deeper. The door at the base was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I was met with the sharp scent of mildew and decay. Inside, the wooden staircase spiraled upward into darkness. I hesitated briefly before beginning my ascent. Each step groaned beneath my weight, and I felt the oppressive weight of the air pressing against my back as I climbed. About halfway up, I found something odd, scratches along the walls, deep and chaotic, as if someone, or something, had clawed at the stone in desperation. Some of the scratches formed crude shapes, circles with lines through them, spirals that turned inward endlessly, and symbols matching those carved into the forest trees. At the top of the tower, I found the bell, or what remained of it. It was cracked down the middle, silent for who knew how long. Scattered around the bell were tattered papers and fragments of bone. But in the center of the floor, beneath a skylight smeared with grime, lay a small wooden box. I opened it. Inside was a fragment of the same idol I had found in the crypt, half of a root-like sculpture, smooth and cold. It hummed faintly in my hands, like the beating of a distant heart. I tucked it carefully into my bag and left the tower, the air seeming a little lighter as I descended. Next was the warden's house. This building stood on the edge of the village, half swallowed by the encroaching forest. Its roof sagged, and vines crawled up its walls like skeletal fingers. I forced the door open and was met with darkness. Inside, the air was colder still, and I could smell the lingering scent of smoke and damp earth. The house was filled with remnants of a life long abandoned, torn clothing, cracked picture frames, furniture reduced to splinters. But there was also something more recent, footprints in the dust. They led from room to room, stopping suddenly at the hearth in the main hall. I approached the fireplace, where the embers had long since died. Upon the mantel sat a faded photograph of a family. A man in a warden's uniform, a woman in a simple dress, and a child, their faces eerily blurred, as though smudged away by unseen hands. Beside the photo was another small idol fragment, this one scorched and blackened. When I touched it, I heard the whispers again, closer this time, filling the room in an invisible chorus of voices layered over one another. They spoke of betrayal, sacrifice, and secrets buried beneath the earth. I backed away and hurried outside, where the mist seemed to recoil from me for a brief moment. 2 fragments now. Next, I turned toward the hollow tree. This was further from the village square, along a narrow path choked with roots and thorns. I followed it until I reached a clearing where a massive, ancient oak stood alone, its branches gnarled and leafless despite the season. A hollow yawned wide at its base, dark and impossibly deep. The air here was thick with decay and the faint scent of something metallic. I knelt at the hollow's edge and shone my lamp inside. The tunnel beneath the tree spiraled downward, its walls lined with those same unsettling symbols I had seen throughout the village. Carefully, I crawled inside, descending into the darkness. The tunnel led to a small cavern where the walls pulsed as if alive. At the center of the room lay the third idol fragment, resting atop a crude stone altar. The moment I lifted it, the air grew heavy, and the ground trembled slightly beneath my feet. The whispers screamed briefly, then fell silent, leaving a void of sound so complete it made my ears ring. I hurried out of the hollow, heart pounding. 3 pieces. That left only the mill. The old watermill stood beside a dried-up stream, its wool broken and still. The building was barely standing, its roof collapsed in places, and the walls weathered and rotting. Inside, I found the machinery silent and rusted. Cobwebs draped from every beam, and the floor creaked ominously underfoot. As I searched, I noticed a hatch in the floor, partially hidden beneath a broken workbench. I pried it open and descended into a dark, earthen cellar. Down here, the air was wet and oppressive. In the center of the room, beneath flickering candles long since burned down to stubs, sat the final idol fragment. This one was unlike the others, it radiated warmth, like something alive. As I picked it up, the 4 fragments began to hum in unison, their tones overlapping like a dissonant melody. Without thinking, I placed them together on the cellar floor. They snapped into place as though they had been waiting centuries to be whole again. The complete idol resembled the great tree from the mural, its roots twisting down into an unseen abyss. The moment it clicked together, the ground shook violently, and I heard it, an immense, deep voice that spoke not through sound, but through thought. "You have awakened me." Terror rooted me in place. I could feel its awareness pressing against my mind, cold and ancient. The voice continued, "The bargain is broken. The roots must feed again." The cellar began to collapse around me, dust and wood raining from the ceiling. I grabbed the idol and fled up the ladder, bursting back into the daylight. But the village was no longer as I had left it. The mist was thicker, almost solid. The houses leaned closer together, their windows glowing faintly from within. I could hear the villagers chanting, their voices no longer faint whispers but booming in unison, echoing through the streets. I ran to the square, where the well had changed. No longer dry and cracked, it now pulsed with a red glow, like the mouth of some great beast. The elder was waiting there, arms outstretched, his face twisted in something between joy and agony. "You must return it," he rasped, his voice breaking the long-held silence. "Return the idol, and seal the root before it consumes us all." But how could I trust him? Was this another trap, another piece of the ritual designed to bind me forever to this cursed place? I stood at the edge of the well, idol in hand. Below, I could hear it stirring, the thing beneath the roots, its hunger awakening after centuries of slumber. I had a choice. To toss the idol into the well and trust that the cycle would end, or keep it, and carry the darkness with me beyond Belgrave's borders. But as I hesitated, the villagers' chant grew louder, the ground shook more violently, and the mist thickened until I could hardly breathe. And then the choice was taken from me. A figure emerged from the mist, unlike the others. Tall, faceless, wrapped in shadows. It reached out and, without resistance, took the idol from my hands. It turned, cradling the object like a child, and slowly descended into the well. The chanting ceased. The ground stilled. The mist thinned. The village fell silent once more. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath, unsure of what I had just witnessed. Slowly, the villagers lowered their hoods. Their faces, though pale and hollow, now bore a strange peace. The elder approached me, resting a frail hand on my shoulder. "You have delayed its hunger," he said quietly. "But it will never truly sleep. Not while the roots still grow." I tried to speak, to ask him what would happen now, but exhaustion overwhelmed me. The world blurred and darkened, and I slipped into unconsciousness. I awoke back in the inn, sunlight streaming weakly through the window. My belongings were beside me, packed and ready. The journal rested on the nightstand, open to the final page. It simply read, "Leave while you can." I obeyed. With one last look at Belgrave, its streets empty and still, I made my way back through the forest. The path seemed clearer now, as if the village had loosened its grip on me. But as I crossed the ridge and glanced back one final time, I saw it, the mist curling once again over the rooftops, the bell tower's shadow stretching long and thin across the fields. And faintly, carried on the wind, I heard them. The whispers. Waiting for the next traveler to answer their call. Shadow, I had thought that leaving Belgrave would free me from its grip. For weeks, I traveled. Through towns and cities, forests and plains, always looking over my shoulder. At first, life seemed to return to normal. People spoke to me without the hollow gaze of the villagers, birds sang in the morning, and the forest smelled of damp leaves and earth instead of rot and decay. But even in these moments of peace, I felt it, faint, distant, but persistent. The whispering never left. Sometimes, it was just on the edge of hearing, like the murmur of leaves in the wind. Other times, it crept into my dreams, where I wandered endless woods, searching for something I could not name. And always, in the center of those dreams, stood the village. Belgrave. I tried to bury myself in work, in crowds, in noise, but nothing silenced the whispers for long. I scoured libraries, spoke with historians and occultists, looking for answers, but most had never heard of Belgrave. Those who had warned me to forget it. There are places that the world leaves behind for a reason, one old scholar told me, his voice shaking. Places that should stay lost. But I couldn't let it go. Something was unfinished. I could feel it every time I closed my eyes. Then one night, I received a letter. No stamp. No return address. Just my name scrawled in black ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, a crude drawing of the idol I had reassembled beneath the village, now cracked and broken once again. Below the drawing, 3 words, "It begins again." I barely slept that night. By dawn, I had packed my bags and was on a train heading north. Belgrave welcomed me like an old friend. The forest path, though less overgrown, felt colder now, as though the earth itself remembered my trespass. The mist was lighter than before but still clung low to the ground, swirling around my boots as I walked. When I reached the village, something was different. The streets were no longer empty. People moved about, tending to what remained of the village with solemn purpose. Their faces were no longer hollow, but they bore the same resigned sadness. Children played near the well, watched closely by their elders. Life, it seemed, had returned to Belgrave. But beneath the surface, I could sense it. The calm before the storm. I sought out the elder. He found me first, standing at the edge of the square where the bell tower still leaned against the sky. "You have returned," he said, his voice softer now, his face marked by the passing of time. "I got your message," I replied, holding up the letter. He shook his head. I sent no such thing. A chill ran down my spine. Then who? He gestured toward the forest beyond the ridge. It calls another now. The cycle cannot end. Not yet. Before I could question him further, a distant horn echoed through the trees. Low and deep, unlike anything I'd heard before. The villagers froze. The hollow opens again, he whispered. And with it, new blood comes to feed the roots. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the mist. Compelled by dread and curiosity, I followed the sound. The path led me beyond the hollow tree, further than I had ever gone before, to a place not marked on any map. Here, the trees grew impossibly tall and twisted, blocking out what little daylight remained. In a clearing, I found them. A group of travelers, 5 in total, standing uncertainly at the forest's edge. Their clothes marked them as hikers, oblivious to the danger they had stumbled into. One of them, a woman in her 30s, was holding something in her hands. The idol. Or at least a piece of it. It was smaller, different somehow, as if regrown from what I had left behind. But its presence was unmistakable. They turned as I approached, wary. You shouldn't be here, I warned. The woman frowned. Neither should you. Who are you? A warning, I said simply. But it was too late. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and from the shadows between the trees, figures began to emerge. Not the villagers. These were something else entirely. Tall, gaunt forms wrapped in decaying robes, their faces featureless beneath bone-white masks carved with the same symbols that covered the village. They moved without sound, surrounding us in a tightening circle. The hikers panicked, stumbling back. But there was nowhere to run. One of the masked figures stepped forward, raising a hand toward the idol fragment. The woman held it tighter. What do you want from us? The figure tilted its head, and in a voice like dry leaves blowing across stone, it spoke. The root feeds. The cycle turns. Give it back. I stepped between them, raising my hands. Take me instead, I said. I'm the one who broke the seal. The figure paused, then lowered its hand. The hunger cannot be denied, it whispered. It will take all who hear its call. Suddenly, the ground split open beneath the hikers' feet, roots snapping upward like claws. They screamed as the forest floor swallowed them whole, dragging them into the darkness below. I lunged forward, grabbing the woman's hand and pulling her free just before the earth closed again. The other 4 were gone. Silence fell over the clearing. The masked figures retreated into the woods, their work done, leaving only the faint echo of the horn. I helped the woman to her feet. She was trembling, staring at the idol fragment still clutched in her hand. What is this place? She whispered. Velgrave, I said grimly. And you've just become part of its story. We returned to the village as night fell. The elder awaited us in the square, expression grave. You have brought a survivor, he said, not unkindly. I couldn't save the others, I admitted. You were never meant to. The forest claims what it needs. He turned to the woman, who still looked shaken but determined. You have heard the whispers now, he told her. They will never leave you. She stared at him. Why me? I didn't ask for this. None of us did, he replied, his voice heavy with centuries of regret. That night, as the village slept, I spoke with the woman by the dying embers of the hearth. She told me her name was Claire, and that she had found the idol fragment near a stream far from Belgrave. She had picked it up out of curiosity, feeling drawn to it without understanding why. Something told me to come here, she said. I couldn't stop myself. I knew the feeling all too well. Belgrave doesn't let go, I told her. Even when you think you've left it behind, it finds you. She stared into the flames, silent for a long while. Then what do we do? I thought of the masked figures, the hollow beneath the tree, the well that pulsed like a living heart. I don't know, I said finally. But we can't just wait for it to happen again. The next morning, we explored the village's outskirts, following the roots that snaked through the earth like veins. We discovered an old chapel hidden beneath layers of vines, its doors warped and sealed. Inside, we found something unexpected, a library, filled with ancient texts and scrolls, detailing the history of Belgrave and its curse. The village, it seemed, had once been a sanctuary, a place where those fleeing the horrors of the outside world sought peace. But in their desperation, they had made a pact with something far older than themselves. The root below. A god, or perhaps a parasite, that fed on fear and sacrifice. In exchange for protection from famine and plague, the villagers had agreed to offer its souls, outsiders who stumbled into Belgrave by chance or fate. But over time, the pact had soured. The root's hunger grew, and the village became a trap rather than a refuge. And now, with the seal broken, the hunger could no longer be contained. Claire and I made a plan. If the root needed sacrifices, perhaps we could starve it. We would find the source, deep beneath the village where the roots were thickest, and sever its connection to the surface. Risky. Perhaps impossible. But better than doing nothing. That night, we returned to the hollow tree. The tunnel beneath it seemed deeper than before, the air colder. We descended, lanterns in hand, until we reached the same cavern where I had first assembled the idol. But now, the cavern was alive. Roots coiled along the walls, pulsing with faint red light. The idol itself had grown larger, planted in the center of the room like a tree sprouting from stone. It breathed in slow, deliberate rhythm, as if asleep. We approached carefully. Claire produced a rusted blade she had found in the chapel, its edge inscribed with protective runes. This might be our only chance, she said. Together, we drove the blade deep into the base of the root. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cavern screamed. The walls shuddered, and a pulse of energy knocked us backward. Cracks split the floor, and the idol writhed, its surface splitting open to reveal something dark and wet beneath. Above us, we heard the bell tower ring for the first time in centuries. The scream faded, replaced by silence so profound it rang in my ears. And then it was over. The root sagged, lifeless. The light faded. Had we succeeded? We made our way back to the surface, exhausted, hoping we had ended the cycle. But as we reached the village square, we found the elder waiting. His face was solemn, but his eyes held a strange peace. You severed the root, he said. But it will grow back. It always does. Then we'll cut it again, Claire said defiantly. He smiled sadly. Perhaps. Or perhaps others will. I glanced toward the forest, where the mist was finally beginning to lift. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw sunlight breaking through the trees. It wasn't over. But it was enough. For now. Trees. I left Belgrave a second time, but the village did not leave me. For days, Claire and I traveled south, hoping to put as much distance as we could between ourselves and that forsaken place. With each mile, the trees thinned and the roads became clearer, yet the silence inside me only deepened. There was no celebrating our survival, only the weight of what we had seen, and what we had left behind. We parted ways in a town called Meriton. Claire planned to warn others, to share our story with anyone who might listen. I wasn't sure if it would make a difference. People didn't believe in monsters until they were staring into their hollow eyes. I rented a small apartment on the edge of the city and tried to rebuild my life. Days passed. Weeks. I found a job cataloging historical documents in the university's archives. It was quiet, methodical work. Just what I needed. But peace was fleeting. The whispers returned. At first, I heard them in my dreams, soft voices speaking in languages I couldn't understand, repeating phrases over and over like prayers or curses. Then they crept into my waking hours. In the hiss of radiators, the hum of streetlights, the rustle of wind through alleyways. Belgrave was still calling. And I wasn't the only one who heard it. One rainy afternoon, while walking home from work, I saw him. A man standing perfectly still beneath a flickering street lamp. His coat was soaked through, his face pale and expressionless. And in his hands, he clutched something familiar. A shard of the idol. I froze. He stared straight ahead, eyes empty, lips moving in silent prayer. I approached cautiously. "Where did you get that?" He didn't respond. Just turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as if swallowed by the city itself. That night, I scoured the news. And found what I feared. Reports of missing persons. Not in Belgrave, but here, in the city. Hikers lost in the urban parks. Tourists vanishing without a trace near abandoned subway tunnels. Locals claiming to hear voices calling them into the darkness beneath the streets. The route was spreading. I contacted Claire. She had been experiencing the same things. "They're leaving Belgrave," she said. "The roots are looking for new places to grow." We met at a library rumored to have occult tomes from the old world. Together, we pieced together what little we could. The root had always been a parasite. Belgrave was only its first host. Now that we had severed it from the village, it was searching for another anchor. And we had led it here. Our research pointed to one location in particular, an abandoned subway station beneath the city. Closed off decades ago after a tunnel collapse, now sealed behind rusting gates and layers of bureaucracy. But according to urban legends, something still moved beneath those streets. The hollow below. We descended into the tunnels late one night, flashlights in hand. The air was thick with mildew and dust, and the silence pressed against our ears. As we crept deeper, the walls began to change. Roots. Small at first, then thicker, splitting the stone and steel as they wound their way through the earth. They pulsed faintly, alive with the same sickly glow I had seen beneath Belgrave. We weren't alone. From the shadows ahead, figures emerged. Not villagers, not the masked creatures from the forest, but people, regular people, faces slack, eyes vacant. Each one holding a piece of the idol. Each one repeating the same phrase, feed the root. Feed the root. Feed the root. They moved toward us in jerking, puppet-like steps. Claire grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "We can't save them," she whispered. "They've already been claimed." I knew she was right. But leaving them behind felt like failure. We ran, deeper into the tunnels, searching for the root's new heart. At the center of the collapsed station, we found it. A vast pit, lined with tangled roots and broken stone. And in the center, something growing. A new idol, larger than before, twisting upward like a tree made of bone and shadow. Its surface was covered in faces, all screaming silently in agony. The whispers filled the air, deafening now. "Feed the root. Feed the root. Feed the root." Claire produced the rusted blade once more. "We end this. Here." I hesitated. "If we cut it again, will it really stop?" She met my eyes, steady and resolute. "Maybe not. But we have to try." Together, we drove the blade into the heart of the root. A shockwave blasted outward, tearing through the tunnels. The ground shook, and the faces on the idol twisted in pain before crumbling to dust. The whispers fell silent. We stumbled out of the tunnels hours later, covered in dirt and blood, gasping for clean air. The city was quiet. Peaceful. For now. But I knew better than to believe it was truly over. The root had been severed again, but it was ancient, patient. It would grow back. Somewhere. Sometime. And when it did, someone else would hear the call. Months passed. Life returned to its dull rhythm. Claire moved to another country, hoping to outrun the whispers. I remained behind, documenting everything we had seen, hoping my words might one day warn others. But some nights, when the wind howls through the alleyways, I hear it again. A distant horn, calling from beneath the earth. And I wonder, how long before the root finds a new home? They say some places are cursed. But the truth is, the curse isn't in the place. It's in us. It had been 7 years since I last heard the horn. 7 years of restless nights and fleeting peace. I thought the nightmare of Belgrave and the hollow below was behind me. But darkness is patient, and some seeds take years to sprout. The city moved on. The subway tunnels where we severed the root were sealed and forgotten, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and concrete. The few who remembered spoke of them as urban legends, ghost stories to frighten late-night commuters. But one evening, as I walked home beneath a storm-choked sky, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. "It's happening again. Meriton. Help. Meriton." The town where Claire and I had parted ways. And then, below the message, a single photo, the idol, whole once more, tangled in black vines and red roots. I packed my things and boarded the midnight train north. Meriton greeted me with empty streets and boarded windows. Even the birds seemed to avoid the skies above it. The air smelled faintly of rot, and beneath the quiet hum of streetlights, I could hear the whispers. They had grown louder. At the center of town, the old church bell tolled. Once. Twice. Each chime sent a ripple through the ground, subtle but insistent, as if the earth itself was shivering in fear. I found Claire in the library's basement, pale and thin, poring over ancient maps and journals. Her hands trembled when she saw me. I tried to stop it, she whispered. But it's worse this time. She pointed to a map pinned to the wall, covered in frantic red circles. Each marked a place where the root had surfaced, city streets cracking open with vines, forests dying overnight, people vanishing without a trace. It's not just Belgrave anymore, she said. It's everywhere. I stared at the map, feeling the enormity of our failure settle on my chest like lead. We can't cut the root fast enough, I muttered. It'll just keep spreading. Claire nodded grimly. Unless we find the seed. The first root. The one that started it all. And so, our search began. We combed through centuries of forgotten lore, piecing together a fragmented history. The story of the root stretched back further than we had imagined, back to an ancient cult that worshipped a being they called the Blooming Hunger. According to legend, the cult had planted the first seed deep beneath the earth, hoping to birth a god that fed on human souls. Belgrave was simply the first place where it sprouted. If we could find that original seed, we might end the cycle forever. The last record of the cult mentioned a cave system far to the west, in a place called Blackthorn Hollow. It was said to be where the cult made their final stand before being wiped out by early settlers. No one had set foot in Blackthorn Hollow for over 100 years. We traveled for days, leaving the broken towns behind, venturing deep into the forgotten forests. The deeper we went, the more the land decayed. Trees withered, animals lay dead in the underbrush, and the very soil beneath our boots turned black and brittle. On the fifth night, we reached it. Blackthorn Hollow. A vast crater ringed by ancient stones, their surfaces carved with the same runes we had seen in Belgrave and Meriton. In the center of the crater yawned a massive sinkhole, its depth swallowing the light. And from that darkness, I heard it. The horn. It was louder than ever before, shaking the very bones of the earth. We descended into the hollow, our lanterns barely cutting through the suffocating darkness. The air grew colder, wetter, thick with the scent of decay and something worse, something ancient. At the bottom of the hollow, we found it. The seed. Unlike the idols we had encountered before, this one was massive, like the trunk of a tree that had grown downward instead of up. Its bark was cracked and bleeding sap that smelled of iron and rot. Vines stretched from its base, winding through the earth in all directions. And as we approached, we saw faces trapped within the bark, hundreds of them, twisting in eternal agony. Claire drew the rusted blade, its edge dull from years of battle. "This is it," she whispered. "The source." We stepped forward, ready to strike. But the seed was not unguarded. From the shadows, figures emerged, more numerous than before. Masked and robed, their bodies twisted beyond human form. They moved as one, forming a wall between us and the seed. Then one of them spoke, its voice 1,000 whispers layered atop each other. "You cannot kill what has always been." Claire tightened her grip on the blade. "Maybe not. But we can starve it." The battle was chaos. The guardians swarmed us, their limbs snapping like branches. We fought with fire, blades, and desperation. For every one we struck down, another took its place. But we pressed on, inching closer to the seed. At the base of the root, I saw it, a hollow space, the heart of the seed pulsing with dark light. I shouted to Claire, and together, we drove the blade deep into the hollow. The seed shrieked. The ground split open, and a flood of black sap poured from the wound, burning everything it touched. The guardians screamed and crumbled to dust, the cavern shaking with the force of their demise. And then, silence. The seed cracked, split down the center like a rotting fruit. Light spilled out, blinding and pure, burning away the darkness. For the first time since Belgrave, I felt peace. Real peace. We crawled out of the hollow at dawn. The forest was quiet, the air clean. Birds sang in the trees, and for the first time in years, there were no whispers. The curse was broken. Or so we thought. Weeks later, back in Meriton, I began to notice something strange. Flowers. Small, delicate blooms sprouting in cracks along the sidewalks, at the edges of forgotten parks, in the corners of old buildings. Beautiful at first glance. But as I looked closer, I saw them for what they were. Tiny replicas of the root's blossom. And when the wind blew just right, I could hear them whisper. It sleeps. It waits. It grows again. The root was gone. But the seeds were planted. And one day, they will bloom. Now I wander from town to town, burning the flowers where I find them, warning those who will listen, and watching the skies for signs of the horn's return. But in my heart, I know the truth. You cannot kill what has always been. You can only delay its return. Decades passed. Names faded, towns fell silent, and the hollow below was swallowed by time. But the bloom never truly died. In the year 2083, when cities stretched like scars across the earth and the stars were barely visible beneath their neon glow, something began stirring once more. It started with a signal. Deep in the archives of an atmospheric research station, hidden beneath layers of corrupted data, a pattern emerged. A rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat, echoing through seismic readings, electrical currents, and even stray radio frequencies. The scientists called it an anomaly. The old ones would have called it a warning. Among the station crew was Ira Vaughn, a systems analyst with a curiosity for the arcane. In her off hours, she fed the pulse through ancient language models and pattern analyzers, cross-referencing them with forgotten dialects and dead religions. The translation chilled her blood. Feed the root. Feed the root. Feed the root. Ira had never heard of Belgrave or Meriton. The records of those cursed places were long buried, their names stricken from maps and databases. But buried doesn't mean gone. Following the trail of data and whispers, she discovered references to an ancient cult, a forgotten village, and a man and woman who had fought the bloom long before she was born. The last known journal entry from the man ended abruptly. It sleeps. It waits. It grows again. And now, it was awake. The signal led her to a derelict industrial zone on the outskirts of New Avalon City, where skyscrapers choked the sky and the ground trembled from subway trains and machines. Beneath the rubble of forgotten factories, she found the entrance to an abandoned water treatment plant, its doors rusted shut, warning signs long since faded. Inside, vines. Black and red, pulsing with faint light, threading their way through cracked concrete and shattered pipes. The bloom had adapted to the modern world. It no longer needed forgotten villages and cursed forests. Now it hid beneath steel and glass, growing unnoticed in the places humanity discarded and forgot. And it was hungry. Ira gathered a team of skeptics and believers alike: Malik, an ex-military engineer with scars from wars long since erased from public record; Dr. Singh, a botanist who had spent her career studying invasive species and mutations in plant life; Nico, a hacker who claimed to have seen the bloom once, on a forgotten CCTV feed deep in the city's underbelly. Together, they descended into the tunnels, their equipment humming softly, flashlights cutting through the thick fog of spores. The deeper they went, the more the world above faded away. Time stretched and slowed, and the walls began to bleed with veins of red sap. At the lowest level, they found it. A new heart. Not a seed, not an idol, but a living, breathing network of vines and roots, pulsating in rhythm with the city's electrical grid. Feeding on its power. On its people. And then the voices came. Not in whispers this time, but in screams. The walls erupted in faces, howling in agony and ecstasy, crying out for release and sustenance. The air thickened with the scent of iron and rot. Malik raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the roots lashed out, pulling him into the mass, his screams joining the chorus. Ira screamed, dragging the others back. "We can't fight it like this. We have to cut the source." But where was the source in this endless, living machine? They retreated, barely escaping with their lives. Back on the surface, Ira stared at the blinking skyline of New Avalon. The bloom was everywhere now. In the power lines, the water supply, the data streams. Killing it wasn't an option. Starving it wasn't enough. She needed a new solution. And then it hit her. What if the root could be tricked? The city beneath New Avalon was no longer a maze of concrete and steel, it was a living, breathing organism. The bloom had woven itself into the very fabric of the urban sprawl, thriving on humanity's own neglect. Ira Vaughn stood at the edge of the decayed water treatment plant, staring into the abyss where the root pulsed with unnatural life. Her team had been decimated. Malik and Dr. Singh were lost to the bloom's insatiable hunger. Only Nico remained, wide-eyed and shaking, clutching a battered data drive that held the key to their desperate plan. "We can't just cut it again," Ira whispered. "It adapts too fast." Nico swallowed hard. "I've been analyzing the signal, the pulse that keeps it alive. It's not just feeding on flesh or blood. It's feeding on connection. The city's networks, the people's fears, everything that keeps us linked." Ira nodded. "Then what if we sever the connection instead of the root?" The plan was dangerous. To starve the bloom, they would have to isolate it completely, shutting down the city's power grids, communications, and water systems for days. A blackout of unimaginable scale. "We'll become the darkness," Ira said grimly. "We'll cut ourselves off to save what remains." The night the city plunged into silence was the longest any of them had ever lived. No hum of machines, no flicker of screens, no footsteps in the streets. Just the oppressive quiet and the faint whisper of the bloom struggling beneath. In the darkness, Ira and Nico moved through the tunnels to the root's heart, the massive network that stretched like a black web beneath the city. With the last of their strength, they planted a device, a pulse disruptor designed to scramble the bloom's communication, to make it deaf and blind to its own spread. The root thrashed, shrieked, the faces within contorted with rage and despair. But the device held. Slowly, the pulsations faded. The veins of red sap receded. The bloom's grasp weakened. When the lights flickered back on, the city was still. Not cured. Not safe. But broken. The bloom was wounded, forced back beneath the earth. Months later, Ira stood on the rooftop overlooking New Avalon's skyline, now glowing with cautious hope. The bloom's seed still lingered, scattered and waiting. But humanity had learned something crucial: darkness feeds on connection. To fight it, we must guard what truly binds us: trust, hope, and the courage to face the shadows. And as the wind whispered through the empty streets, Ira smiled bitterly. The bloom sleeps again, but it will never die. It waits. It grows.